Finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode this week. And we are super stoked about this one, at least I am, because it is our favorite trainer, and maybe yours too if you follow Cori on Redefining Strength on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. She's everywhere. She has her own podcast as well. So Cori Lefkowitz is our guest today, and she was on our episode previously. But today we are talking about food, diets, and specifically macro hacks. What are macros? What are macro hacks? Does it really matter? We will get into that today with Cori and share with you how we're getting lean, buff, and better than ever.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's interesting because I've, having counseled a zillion patients over, 30 years or so, there's this misconception that the way you lose weight is exercise. And actually, if you look at any data, both, real or anecdotal, exercise is worth maybe 10% of body mass, and you have to exercise a lot. Unless you're going to be Michael Phelps and burn 8,000 calories a day, you're not going to be able to eat whatever you want. Ergo, as far as weight loss is concerned, it really centers 100% on what you put in your mouth. And the only way you're going to figure what that is if you track it. It's super boring and not sexy to talk about when you think of it, but it's the only way to get results. And we get into this and why counting macros, in other words, which we'll explain in a little bit, is so critically important because it really aids in the sustainability of changing what you eat, which is the critical piece to the puzzle. Well, before we get started, we have a word from our sponsor, which appropriately enough is Steelhead Fitness.
You want to be around for your loved ones. You want to stay active, go places, have fun. Your health plays into your quality of life. Why not get your health moving in the right direction and get fit with Steelhead Fitness? Exercise is preventable medicine. There's so much to gain. You'll feel better, be more active and vital, you'll lose weight, and have a healthier mental outlook. Steelhead Fitness provides everything you need. A friendly, helpful staff, a clean, safe environment available 24/7, and a variety of options to fit any lifestyle, including cardiovascular fitness, strength training, group fitness classes, senior programs, and nutritional health, plus personal training, state-of-the-art tech, and free introductory programs for new members. We're a fitness center for the whole community. Steelhead Fitness is dedicated to your success, so you can be around to live life at its best. Get moving. Come in for a free trial today. Steelhead Fitness on Main Street in downtown Sweet Home. What's your reason to be fit?
I'm excited to have Cori Lefkowitz back with us this week again. If you haven't heard our recording from before that she did with us when we talked about motivation and strength, go back and I'll link it and listen to it. But welcome, Cori. Thanks for being here again today to talk about macros.
It is my pleasure to nerd out more about it.
So just as a brief introduction, you are the CEO, right? Owner, founder of Redefining Strength. If anybody's been on Facebook and is into fitness and training and you haven't seen Cori, then I don't know where you've been because you got like 500,000 followers. I've been following you for years and found you mostly through rehab exercises for injuries that I had. And it's great. You're on YouTube, Instagram, but you've been on Facebook for quite a while. And now, for years I was seeing all the posts on macros, message me for macro hacks, check this out. And so as a doc, I'm like, macro hacks, doesn't sound like fun. Macros, I think I know what it is. Actually, I would say I did know because a friend of mine who owns a gym was also into bodybuilding and fitness competitions. And I remember her counting her macros, weighing her food. And I'm like, this sounds just hideous. Like, why would anybody want to do this? because it would just make life too difficult. I eat pretty healthy, so I don't think I need to do that. So before I kind of keep going any further, because now that I've changed my tune, and Tim and I, in full disclosure, are now customers / clients at Redefining Strength, because we were just so convinced we needed a makeover after last
Cori
last recording.
is training us, so she is literally an effective cat herder.
So
that's my title, not CEO, cat herder.
So I've changed, done a complete 180 on macros since starting to do it. Before I dish more on what we're doing, thanks to you, walk us through. Let's talk about macros, like basically break down what they are and what it means to sort of separate out the protein, carbs, etc., and the ratios and so forth for people that don't know anything about it.
Yeah, so macros is the really nifty name for macronutrients, or the nutrients that our body needs in large quantities, so the protein, carbs, and fats. And I actually think that it is one of those things that most people who have heard of it, sort of in the dieting realm, have heard of it because of a bodybuilder friend or whatnot. And it makes me kind of sad, partly because I was actually really against macros myself early on. And I realized I was doing all these things to try and avoid tracking macros because it was this bodybuilder thing. It seemed super restrictive. Who wanted to log all our food? What the heck was it even? I didn't know the breakdown of my food. So I went, like trying to do paleo. I went to intermittent fasting. I did what was the potato diet? Crazy, stupid, sounds way better than it was. But I tried all these different things in an attempt to get results faster and avoid doing the hard thing. Because macros aren't easy. They are really overwhelming. They feel like a foreign language because we haven't really learned the breakdown of our foods growing up. And it's actually kind of sad. We talk about healthy foods, clean foods, but what does that really mean? And how do all those foods really impact our body? How do they fuel us? What impact do they have on our hormone levels, on our energy, on our body composition? We never learn that, right? We just learn certain foods are good, certain foods are bad. And even those labels, I try and avoid as much as possible because I think it doesn't allow us to find balance. So it's one of these things that with tracking macros, basically what you're doing is you're logging all of your food, the portions of your food you're eating. You're then learning what is in each protein source that you're getting, what's in each vegetable that you're eating, each carb, because you'll actually start to realize that most things don't just have one macro. They have some breakdown of different things. Like shrimp are basically all protein, no fat. But then you have different cuts of steak even, which have different amounts of protein and different amounts of fat. It was actually funny. One of my staff members, Erica, she was actually tracking her food for the first time as well when she came on board, because she's like, okay, I have to understand what I'm having people, going to be doing in the program. And so she was talking to her husband and she's like, did you know eggs have so much fat in them? And he's like, no, they don't. She's like, yes, they do. Go look at the label on the carton. And he was like, oh my goodness, didn't even know that it had fat in it, right? So it's when you learn about macros, you're really learning about the fundamentals of what's in the foods you're eating. So you can sort of see how they all impact you to adjust your portion sizes to get any results you want. Because while, a lot of us are introduced to macros through bodybuilding, it can be muscle gaining, fat loss, fueling your performance, all that stuff.
Well, the one thing that drives me absolutely crazy in kind of the nutrition world is there's Hare Krishnas and there's Moonies and there's all of these various, the Branch Davidians, and then there's nutrition, which is the cultiest thing in the entire world. It's it's almost as bad as my metalhead friends. It's well, I can't listen to that. That's not metal. And I'm like, well, you're just a dick, right? The reality is, and this is why, as frustrating as it's been for me personally at times, this is why I'm such a big fan of doing this, is because it makes you cognizant of what's going in your body, where before you were just totally, at least I was just kind of well, I'll eat till I'm not hungry or till I'm just barely full or whatever the case may be, or I'll be super hungry all the time. And you have really no idea what's going in. And it's really akin to, people that want to get ahead financially, and they never want a budget. They never want to know how much money's coming in and how much money's going out. So every single person that has a decent job, if they follow certain principles, can retire at a certain age and maintain their lifestyle until they're dead. but it doesn't happen by accident. It happens very intentionally.
No, that's a perfect example.
And this is exactly the same thing. So, you can do Atkins, or you can do keto, or you can do intermittent fasting, or you can do, but the problem with those things is they're not really a lifestyle, right? It's like
but the
saving
thing
up.
is, they are, if you learn that they're all based on macros. So that's like the thing.
Right.
It's like
But
you
that's what I'm
might find.
like.
No, I was just gonna say, like, once you realize that Atkins is based on macros, then you don't have to restrict foods. But yes, they take the approach of you have to cut out X food group, and if you don't plan to ever eat that food group again, because maybe you do have an intolerance to it or some sort of health concern, okay, that's all well and good, right? We do have some things we have to eliminate for health reasons, but unless you plan to actually cut it out, you're arbitrary following rules. You're not actually understanding the principles. If you want full control over your lifestyle forever, you need to just go through the hard. As sucky as it is, you got to embrace that you've got to learn about macros. And if we started teaching it earlier, it wouldn't be so hard. It's not hard to add now because we did that when we were younger. If we learned to do macro math in school, it wouldn't be so hard as we got older, but we also get a little bit more resistant to making those changes. We also default back into what was easy at the time, right? It's easy to do Atkins, to do keto, to cut out something, lose the weight. The problem is it doesn't really work. And that's why someone's, again, looking for another solution later on, or complaining that with age, with menopause, with all these different things, they're seeing all these negative impact. They're negatively impacted by those things because it's not only age or other things adding up, hormone levels changing, but it's the fact that they had improper dieting practices, which created metabolic adaptations and all those different things because they didn't embrace the learning. So it is one of those things that if you embrace macros, you have control to make those other things a lifestyle, or understand how you can even implement them into your lifestyle and if they're right for you. But they're all based on macros.
Well, and
they
that's
just want to tell you something.
Yeah, that's what I always said to patients. I said, this is working great for you, and I'm glad you're feeling better, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you're telling me that you're never going to go to your kid's birthday party and have a piece of birthday cake like ever again for the rest of your life. So help you God. I mean, that's just nuts. Like that's completely unsustainable, right? I mean, it's not alcohol. It's not something that you can completely eliminate from your life and you never need it and you can figure out how to live without it, or smoking, or any other sort of deleterious habit. It's food, for the love of heaven, and you have to eat. And to never celebrate with food ever again based on special occasions or whatever is just crazy. Plus, I think there's a marketing kind of gimmickiness that goes along with, keto friendly, whatever. And the guy, I've picked up some of these bags now, and I looked and it says keto friendly, and I'm like, well, why is there 15 grams of carbs in this if it's keto friendly? Like
oh my goodness.
It's not even keto friendly. Are you kidding? It's flipping you off.
So
but people don't even realize that keto is like different ratios. Like the original keto ratio was used for epilepsy and seizures. And a lot of the keto ratios that are now being used for weight loss aren't even the original keto ratio. So yes, you can be in ketosis, but then people are doing all these different things. Like one of the things that actually drove me crazy was I was like doing primal way before paleo became a thing. And this is not like I was doing it first, but I was doing it early on. And part of the reason you cut out certain things was like, you wanted to cut out phytic acid. That's why you cut out, specific grains, different stuff like that. And then you see all these paleo people eating all these nut flours and doing all these different things where I'm like, but you're eating something now in such a large quantity that you wouldn't be able to eat naturally. And you're basically putting the same thing back into your body that you're cutting it out, but you don't understand that because now you're just following arbitrary lines for arbitrary reasons. You're not actually learning about the foods. You don't understand what the original thing was implemented for.
Right. Well, I'm going to say that I'm probably dating myself, and maybe it's because of where I went to school in Canada, but I was back in the day, took home ec when it was required, and all the guys had to take shop class. And we learned, but like I said, this is dating me. We did learn, protein, carb, and fat, and what's in food. And I don't think we learned the ratios, but I know that I did in biochemistry and in med school as far as how many calories per gram, etc. But I remember from learning that when I was a kid doing the home ec class, I had a basic understanding of protein, carb, and fat, but I don't think we're teaching that in schools now. So people, you're right, don't have a basic understanding of what food is made up of. They don't know what carbs, carbs makes me laugh because everybody thinks carbs is pasta and bread. And that's the only thing that carbs are. And then there's this clean and dirty bit, which gets, totally thrown in there as well. So when we say we're starting to track macros, basically you're breaking it down into protein, carbs, and fat and tracking it, right? That's
Yeah.
basically the gist of macros.
Yeah, I mean, you're logging all of your different food to see how it impacts you, to see how like full fueled you feel, to see the results that you get. And especially for someone just starting out, just track. It's really eye-opening to then learn what is in each food. Don't even try and like set a ratio, don't even try and make a change, just log. And the reason I like doing that and the reason macros are different than calorie counting is because I always put macros at the bottom of the pyramid of the food pyramid when people get really mad because they think calories should be down there. But you'll find that if you had 1,500 calories of processed food versus unprocessed food is going to make a difference. But even 1,500 calories where you're 40% protein, you are going to feel so different than 1,500 calories where you're 20% protein or 10% protein and like 60% carb. So it's one of those things that through then adjusting your macro ratios, you're going to realize you feel a way different feeling being in a deficit, and you're going to see a way different result being in a deficit or even a surplus based on how you adjust those macros. But just by tracking, you're starting to see what you're actually eating, the portions that you're actually eating. You'll be surprised by how bad at eyeballing things you actually are. For me, it was like nut butters. I'm like, oh, this is like 2 tablespoons. And I'm like, that's like 6 tablespoons when I weigh it out. Not right.
I know, right? Like, so I, have healthy eating habits. I thought I was eating great. And what I think is so funny is, people, especially guys for sure, but females would go, no, I'm a big meat eater. I eat lots of protein, based on what? I don't know, comparing yourself to somebody else. And I always thought, yeah, I eat a ton of meat until I started tracking and I'm like, holy cow. So I wasn't even getting 25% of my macros. Like I wasn't even hitting 25% protein in my diet. And I assumed I was like way over. If I had to guess, I'd say I was like thinking I was like 40% or something. So let's start with, how do people start to track their macros? Because it sounds horrible. It's like tracking your spending, your budget. But tell us the easy way to get started doing that. What apps are out there, what you recommend, and like walk us through what it looks like to track our macros.
So as cheesy as it sounds, my favorite example of what tracking macros is it's a recipe. Okay. So you are trying to find your recipe to bake that perfect, delicious cake. Okay. Whatever cake you like best. If you're a bad baker, right, you're not going to go and just start throwing stuff into a bowl and be like, well, I know these things might be in there. Let's just hope it turns out, right? I can tell you from experience, if you even wing it when you think because you've made a recipe before, it doesn't turn out. Okay. Maybe it just makes me a horrible baker, but you don't throw things in randomly, right? So if you think about it, if you're trying to create this recipe to get a specific result, you don't want to just be throwing things in randomly. When you're tracking, and I like using my Fitness Pal, there's also Lose It, those different things. Those will break down the macros in the different ingredients that you enter, but it'll allow you to see the big picture, and then you can look at the pie chart and start making changes. But basically what it's allowing you to do is say, okay, I have these ingredients. Now, how can I get the portions right to actually get the results that I want? And then you can tweak it, right? You might start getting results and want to lose weight and you're making that chocolate chip cookie. But now you want to gain some muscle. So instead of making a chocolate chip cookie, you know how to tweak it to now make a white chocolate macadamia nut cookie, right? Because you can make little different variations, which is where the swaps and the ratios are. But you want to think that when you're tracking, as tedious, as boring as whatever it is, you weigh and measure everything when you make a recipe because you want it to turn out. You're weighing and measuring everything because you want your recipe of results to turn out. So just start by currently weighing and measuring out the foods you're eating. So like if you have, granola that you're measuring out, you can take a measuring cup, you can use a food scale. I actually like the food scale because then I don't have to use measuring cups and different things, and I can be really lazy and do fewer dishes. But you just sort of measure everything out, just like as if you were entering ingredients in to bake a cake, to bake cupcakes, whatever else. And then as you add this to your food tracker, it will pull all the different nutritional information. So you don't even have to like look that up or know it. And then from there, you'll sort of like learn what's in protein or what is in your chicken, what is in your different fruits, because fruits have different carb contents. You'll start to see the breakdowns of those things to then make tweaks. And that's where I like people to start, even over, like there's some people like May, you did a great job just like jumping in, hitting the ratios, embracing that you're going to have to make some bigger changes. No, and Tim, you did too, because you guys feel comfortable enough to be like, okay, I'm going to be uncomfortable in this way. I'll make some bigger changes. I'll play around. I'll plan ahead. I'll do these things. But sometimes people don't feel as comfortable doing that. So just even thinking, hey, how can I take what I'm doing currently and just adjust one portion, right? If I take the 4 ounces of meat I'm eating and put in a 5th ounce, how does that then impact the overall day? Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, create new recipes, how can I take what I'm currently doing and make little changes that are going to grow me towards my goal? And that's what I even like to start with people with, because It's a way to sort of see the foods you love and make sustainable changes over sweeping changes. Because that's what like Atkins keto sometimes do, right? They cut up foods. We don't know how to balance them back in. We don't know how to fit our lifestyle. Versus if you track what you're currently doing and make changes to that, you're building off of the foundation you already have.
Well,
I mean, I think it's really, for me, just I did it for the first week, but I would give people even longer. You know, I would say a week or two, or just eat like you normally would and get used to measuring and weighing. At first, it was a pain. I literally measured my wine. He'd laugh at me. I have this little pampered chef thimble sized thing, and I'm like 2 ounces, 4 ounces, six, kind of a thing, and would measure it because I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm type A. I want to do it right. And
May
we have a postal scale, and I just use
May
that.
should have been a Catholic in the 1930s.
Hey,
She's like, I got to go confess I had an extra half an ounce of something I didn't write down. And I'm like,
and Tim's like
so?
the baker from the Muppets. He kind of just throws it in. He's like, that's close enough. Yeah, that's good. That's whatever. So we're kind of the opposite. It's funny, but I would say, honestly, I think it's good for people to make an attempt as best as you can to measure. Just eat like you're gonna. I think eat like you're gonna normally do, with no judgment, and just like track it and say, okay, what am I doing, and keep a log. And then I think the light bulb will hit you in the head really hard, and you'll be like, whoa, wow. Because I think people really over or underestimate, what they're doing. Wouldn't you say?
I would. And I think even just doing that, like, not only will you be able to make accurate changes, but you'll really be able to see, like, hey, maybe why do I feel so hungry? Or why do I feel so low energy? Or are my calories even too low for what I'm trying to accomplish? You know, it really does give you that picture of what you're doing and allow you to make changes. And as tedious, boring, annoying as it is, the more you do it, the easier it becomes, right? You don't think about it because, like, if you're making a recipe and following instructions on the recipe, you are measuring all those things into the recipe. This is really no different, except that you're entering it in. And the more you enter in, the quicker it goes in the future. Not to mention, it's one of these things that if you understand portion sizes, you won't have to necessarily track forever. Like, I can eyeball a lot of different portion sizes. I choose to track still because I really don't think I have an excuse, and it just makes sure that if I ever want to look back, see what was done, I have the data. But it's one of those things that I have clients that they've tracked for long enough, they understand their portions. They'll track occasionally when they're like, my pants are getting a little tight, I had too many holiday cookies, or hey, I really want to fuel for this performance. That's really helpful. But even just tracking to start, where you're not trying to make any changes, it allows you to realize the tracker is not judging either. Like, I think that's one of those things. We come in thinking tracking is restrictive, macros are restrictive, they cause that restrictive mindset. We have to realize that we can create that restrictive mindset with anything. If you don't track, you can create that restrictive mindset because you're not tracking it, you don't know, and so then you're freaked out because you don't know. You could claim that by tracking every little morsel, you're making yourself restrictive, but there is no judgment other than the judgment we put on ourselves. So by tracking, you're just seeing how you're fueling to even eat more, to fuel for your race. Like, I can't tell you how invaluable it's been for my endurance athletes trying to actually PR. You know, if you want to lose weight, if you want to gain muscle, if you just want to even deal with the symptoms of menopause, you can see different foods and how they impact you. So it's remembering that tracking is just this tool to do so many other things, but really understand how you're fueling.
Yeah, it's data. I mean, it's just like anything else. Like the budget is a perfect example. But if you don't know what the data is, then how you can't make change. And it doesn't lie. You're right. It's not judgmental. It is what it is.
You know, I wish I would have done this when I was running marathons, because, you know, this is back 20 plus years ago. I ran my first in 93, and you know, it was so carbohydrate centric then, right? So then, you know, you carb load like crazy, and I'm literally eating the equivalent of, well, I mean, I was super thin. Like, I mean, but I was literally eating the equivalent of cornstarch, you know, like
you should have been Italian, but the
gobs
of
pasta it the night before the race. So I was totally glycogened out. But then what happens is you're so dependent on those, on that metabolic pathway, that if you're not eating during the race, you're dead. And so I figured out, you know, with the goos, I could start at 10 miles and then I'd have a goo every, you know, 5 miles or so. And then that would keep me powered. But I think, man, it would have been so much more efficient just to being able to train myself to, while I was training, you know, for months, to burn fat better. And then it wouldn't have mattered.
Or eat more protein to build more muscle so that you actually have more speed to run a little bit faster. You know, like, there's so many nuances to it. And I also think that it's one of these things that as we track, we can see what really works for us. because one thing does not work for every person. And we have these people being clean, dirty, this diet, that diet. Well, you know why there's so many options out there? Because literally so many of these different things work. Like my favorite line ever, and you guys have probably heard me say this, is don't tweak the freaks. And I firmly believe that each one of us is like a freak. And instead of trying to tweak us to fit a diet, we should be finding what actually fits our lifestyle. And that's not just what actually gets us the result. It's what we enjoy so we can do consistently. Because as weird as it sounds, I believe that someone can have an imperfect program and get better results if they can actually be consistent with it for longer over a perfect program in a shorter amount of time, right? Where they're not consistent with it, it's too restrictive.
No, it's exactly right. I mean, it's what David Chilton says in The Wealthy Barber. Very few people get rich quick. Everyone can get rich slow. And that was actually
overnight successes aren't overnight successes. They've done everything in their life previously to build towards this, even if it doesn't seem like it's actually technically building towards it.
No, well, it's Jared Isaacson. If you watch that documentary about the four people that Elon Musk sent up last September, the first four civilians in space. It was a fascinating documentary, like 4 or 5 episodes. So Jared Isaacson, when you watch that, he's a billionaire and he came up with some super geeked out way to process credit card payments. And you listen to what he did in his young adulthood to make that successful. He was working 18 to 20 hours a day, just figuring out these algorithms to make it work until it finally hit. So was he an overnight success? Yes, in 10 years. Like when it hit, it was spectacular and it made a pile of money. And he made nothing before, but it was like work, boom, overnight success. But he was only an overnight success because what makes people successful, unfortunately, is tedium. I mean, that's really the truth.
Yeah, there's no way around the hard. If you want not only good results in a certain amount of time, but lasting results, you got to embrace the hard, which is why I like macros. Because throughout your life, you know how to adjust. And it's why I honestly believe people will be like, well, I'm eating clean, I'm eating properly, and I'm not seeing results. Well, A, you can overeat healthy foods. B, your needs, your goals are constantly evolving, whether or not it is getting older, whether or not it's changes in your lifestyle, being more or less active even over the year, whether or not it's hormonal changes, your body is changing. And when you understand the breakdown of the foods you're eating and how you can even change those, you can then make adjustments so that you always feel your best. I mean, I use this example a lot, but it's very relevant. It's like even over the course of the year, in the winter, I'm less active. In the summer, I'm more active. My needs need to change because my lifestyle has changed. Even something as simple as that, you get injured, your fueling needs to change versus when you're training hard for a marathon, right? Even over the course of your race training, your mileage is increasing. The way you're changing up your training split is even changing. So your fuel needs to change.
Yeah.
Well, we've had injury. I had not a catastrophic, but I had enough of a knee injury that it took me out of running, which was essentially the exercise balance point for everything else I did. And then eventually you get to a point where you realize that that vodka is not a macro if you want to stay that the same way.
It's a dirty carb. I've learned that.
It's not even a carb. Macro is its own alcohol, or own macro.
Yeah.
Alcohol is its own macro with 7 calories per gram, high thermic effect, but you have to log it as carbs or fat, preferably fat. But that's a whole other story with macro tracking.
Well, I started logging it as fat, and it's way better. It's like, I could drink way more because I'm so low on
not as
fat.
lettuce. You can't log it as
your
lettuce.
ratio right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you didn't have fat, you'd be logging as carbs.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So when someone's starting to track and keep track, then they go, okay, I'm eating this many calories. I got this macro ratio, which is probably carb laden, I can imagine most of the time. But where do we go from there? Do you recommend following a plan? Do you suggest everybody should start at a certain ratio of carbs, fat, protein for the beginner? Does it just, like, I know there's so many tweaks, like you said, everybody's different, but if you're just starting out, what do you usually recommend to people to do as far as ratios?
So if I'm going with a very beginner baseline ratio that I think in general is a very healthy ratio, will get a majority of the people results. If you have no idea where to go for an even third split. Okay. The closer you get to sort of 30, 30, 30, and I know that does not add up to 100%, but in some range of that, you're going to see weight loss results. That's also generally an easy ratio to then increase your calories and see maintenance. So that is a very safe assumption to start at. It's actually a very accepted assumption across a whole bunch of different diets. So it's one of those more universal in the very culty nutritional field. So it's one of those things that is one way to sort of approach it. I usually like to have clients bump protein first and not even worry about carbs and fat. So getting towards that even third split, focusing on, can we get you to 30% protein? Because if you can get there, if you tend to like carbs more, you tend to like fat, or you really cycle day to day, gives you a little more flexibility to sort of live your lifestyle. But if you get to that 30% protein, that's sort of the minimum high level where you're going to see great results.
And I think for most people, I would say, I don't know, maybe it's my bias, but I think getting to 30% protein is tougher than people think, especially women, because it requires a lot of meat eating. And even if you don't eat meat, but if you're just doing like the plant-based protein, I think it's even tougher, because then your carbs go up, because, beans and other things have a lot of carbs. If they're plant-based protein, right, they're going to have a bit more carbs to them. And so I think that if a lot of people aren't used to eating that, it's a work. So that it's not impossible, and a lot of people like it.
I don't know how you could get. I honestly do not know. You would what it would take to get over 40% protein if you were vegan. Like, you got to go hunting some tofus or something.
Or a lot of supplements.
I was gonna say I have had vegan athletes who have gotten up to 50% protein. They don't usually want to stay there, but it's just a lot of food in general, between chickpeas, tofu, seitan, I never remember how you pronounce that word, tempeh, like she did nutritional yeast and everything. She had to get very creative, but she actually did do it. And she was only having one shake a day, so that was pretty good, because we do like to try and avoid that. But it's hard. I don't generally,
and that's a lot of fiber too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't necessarily go that high with someone who is plant-based, because I don't think it's sustainable. So as much as I might want them to, for the reasons that usually a lot of the plant-based proteins are deficient in amino acids, their digestibility is not as good. That's a whole other discussion. If this is their lifestyle choice and their dietary preference, I always want to work within that, because I think, again, it goes back to what can you do consistently? So therefore, we might keep them at 30, 35, 40% at most, versus somebody who even comes in saying, hey, I want to compete. Okay, then yeah, sure, we're going to cram you full of protein, and that's going to be it, because you have an aesthetic goal, you want results really fast, right? So also the ratio you use, it depends on speed of results that you want. Also what you are adapted to. And I think too, carbs and fat generally taste better, right? And so it's one of these things that we grew up having those things. We grew up thinking those things were good. Fruits and vegetables are, the healthiest things for you. So we tend to sort of focus on those things, and we don't even realize all of the micronutrients in meat, which like we can't get in that same form in any other like way, shape, or form, or from any other sort of fruits, vegetables, whatever. So it's one of these things that we have to also start to shift our mindset, because it becomes easier to eat the protein. Yes, we don't like it as much. It doesn't taste as good as, the sugary fruits or, bread sometimes, but it's one of those things that it's so important to our health that we can't not recognize that. It's not just that protein will help with weight loss even.
Yeah. And not to, again, cult out, but humans do have eyes on the front of their head, which suggests that we are predators. And so, just from an, adaptive evolutionary perspective, we've been eating dead things for a really long time. And, agriculture didn't exist for, how old's agriculture? 4,000 years, 5,000 years, so it was fruits, nuts, the odd vegetable, and then a mastodon, and so obviously we're really adapted to eat those things. And it's an interesting journey. The other stuff that you learn about is fish, like holy mackerel. If you want a literally holy mackerel, like if you want a ton of really easy to consume protein, like whitefish, codfish, that isn't all breaded up and whatnot, it's amazing. I like shrimp, so that one's easy. I mean, like
shrimp are beautiful.
Yes, they are. Thank you, little bottom feeders. It's amazing.
But like, even if you want to hit shrimp, and then you even combine it like surf and turf, sometimes I'll do steak and shrimp so that I can have a little lower fat to bump the protein. There's so many ways to do it when you get creative. And I think it's also just taking that time to see it as a fun experiment. I actually have like a couple, they're doing it together too. Not you guys, just not making it weird, but and they're having fun making their own like nachos, right? They're each making their variations that fit their macros, but they're having fun experimenting with new recipes. And the more you sort of see it as like that opportunity, instead of saying like, oh, I'm forced to do this or I can't have something, be like, what can I fit in, you know? And that gets you being creative with the shrimp and the steak in a stir fry, or even like shrimp and edamame and quinoa, where you get these other plant-based sources of amino acids on top of that, or adding in an egg or egg white to that stir fry with those other things. You know, you get creative in how you can sneak it in, so it's not just you cramming in a whole bunch of meat even, you know?
No, I mean, it's amazing how, so me being type A and wanting to try to, exact out my numbers by the end of the day. So I kind of plan it. I'm starting to learn to plan ahead. At first, I was like, nah, it's like clothing. I don't want to plan my food out. It depends on my mood. I'm going to eat what I'm in the mood. That's how I've always been. And then kind of like clothes. And then by the end of the day, I was like 50 grams down on protein. I'm like, I was eating literally one night at 10:30 at night, scrambled eggs, a massive thing of salmon, and I was going to blow up and die, but I'm like, I'm going to get this right, damn it. So I'm like, that's not going to work. So learning how to
Just go to confessional. It's a lot more efficient.
Yeah, he would say bag it, and I'm like, no, I must eat it by 12 p.m. or I'll turn it to a pumpkin and die.
But I'm in a different situation. Like I want to lose more fat, so I'm on a higher protein ratio.
He's losing weight, and I'm trying to gain.
And I'm like, okay, well, if I'm not hungry, why would I keep eating?
Well, then I need to keep eating. But
well, there's a little retraining process, so it is more complicated than that, because you sometimes have to retrain people to fuel more, because that actually helps build the muscle mass, which actually helps with the weight loss process. So there are times you will have to eat when you're not hungry in that retraining process. But yes, like if you are full, if the day hasn't worked out, like that's also where I do think I get your thing, May, of having to hit it, which is why planning ahead can be so key. But it's also one of those things that if you do have one of those days where it's just off, things came up, just sort of chalk it up, see what you could have tweaked maybe for a future day with that day, move forward the next day, right? Too often we feel guilty. We sort of, lament that day, and that's what ruins like 5 more days instead of just moving forward. And really, ultimately, if you just move forward, that one day doesn't make a difference, especially if you just didn't slash the other 3 tires. You get flat. You don't slash the other 3, you call the tow truck, right? So it's like if you don't slash the other 3, you just move forward, you're going to be better off.
But back to the point where we were talking about trying new things. I mean, honestly, it's like pretty cool, because I'm like, hey, instead of ice cream, which I love, and I found some ways to actually probably eat more ice cream than I normally would, because I'm like, yeah, there's room for it. I mean, taking things like cottage cheese or yogurt and then adding fruit and cinnamon honey, or adding the egg whites to my smoothie, which I would have never thought of doing before, but someone in the group suggested it to sneak in that extra protein. I mean, I'm like, okay, nutritional yeast, this sounds kind of gross, but I'll give it a try. I think I'm allergic to it, by the way, because I break out in itching every time I eat it. But all these things, it's kind of fun. I mean, you get to try new things. You see what you like, what you don't like. And sometimes you find you can I wouldn't say live without those things that you thought you had to have every day, because you can make room for them, but you just have to make a choice. And I think it's kind of fun.
Well,
but you hit on it there. It's a choice, right? It was interesting. They actually did a study of the psychology with it, right? Where people would say, I can't have something, versus I'm just not a person who eats this. I don't want this, right? And with macros, the thing is nothing is off limits, okay? And this is not too good to be true. It's just that you can't eat whatever you want whenever you want. Just like you can't wake up without an alarm if you have to get up at 7 a.m. and want to guarantee you get up at 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. or 5, whatever is actually hard for people. I don't know. But it's one of those things that you can't, of course, do whatever you want whenever you want every single day of your life. But the point is by knowing that you can work it in, that you can find that balance, all of a sudden you don't want it quite as much, because there's not a pressure that you're going to be missing out. And that's really the key. Like for me, if I had a pint of Ben & Jerry's, I would not stop at 1 serving of that. So I don't generally include that on the average day, right? I know that's going to trigger more cravings for me. It's not worth it, right? So I have it on a day where I can eat the whole pint and I don't care. But I found Yasso bars or other frozen yogurt substitutes like the Halo Tops. I do like Greek yogurt with cookie butters in there and like granola. I found other swaps that satisfy the craving. And I'm not saying I can't have Ben & Jerry's. I could work it in. I'm just choosing to have these other things. Feels better. I feel happier.
Yeah, that's the beauty of what I like about doing macros, is that there's nothing that's off limits. I mean, if you can literally eat ice cream every day if you want to plan around that. put your ice cream in and plan everything else around it. And I did that for a couple of days and I'm like, okay, that's gross. I really don't need all this sugar anymore. And I've had my fill, but I mean, then going from there, I guess, do you ever, get on someone's case, look at their macros and going, dude, you're planning your whole day around your ice cream. You got to quit because you need to get healthier carbs in? Or what is the most important part, really meeting the macro balances?
So there's obviously always a balance, but I think the dieting industry makes a lot of money off of labeling foods as good and bad, making things so restrictive, making us feel guilty if we don't eat whole natural foods. And getting into processing and what processed foods are is like a whole other like ball of wax, because technically cooking is processing. But anyway, it's one of those things that I really don't judge someone else, because you have to always meet yourself where you're at. If you're eating fast food for 3 meals a day, the last thing you want to do is be like, I can't eat fast food 3 meals a day. Instead, you have to make small swaps, right? If you're going to Domino's and you're getting pizza, maybe we have one less slice of pizza and a side salad, right? You want little changes like that. So yes, you obviously want those micronutrients. They're very valuable. What micronutrients are valuable? You're going to hear a whole bunch of arguments about that too. So for me, it's always like, how can we get something sustainable based on where you're at? And if there is something that you're like, I can't live without this. And yes, technically we can live without anything, right? It's our mindset choosing to. But right now, when you're making changes, don't cut that thing out first. Because what's going to make you actually be able to make the most changes, eventually snowball on those changes, is making smaller things. So if you're like, ice cream is a non-negotiable, I'd be like, okay, cool. Let's see what other things we can work in by cutting other things out. Like people come to me like, I can't get as many vegetables because of the lower carb ratio. I'm like, no, you're prioritizing these pasta, this bread, this other oatmeal over adding more vegetables. So if you really want to value vegetables, we can just change the portion size. And it doesn't even mean cutting out all the pasta you're having. Maybe you're having 3/4 of a cup and we go to half a cup, right? It's making those small swaps, but really finding the balance right for you, because there are so many variables to health, from feeling like full fuel to take on the challenges, not stressing too much. But I do think there's such a balance that I will work with you first to create the healthiest version of your personal lifestyle. No judgment.
So let's talk about ratios, specific different types. And I mean, gosh, this could be like a whole day's talk, but is there a way to generalize what you like to use for someone who's trying to build muscle, or someone who's, say, postmenopausal, of course, or someone who's, like racing a big, they're doing an endurance race? I mean, is there a certain kind of ratios you like to use, and how long?
So it is a difficult question, and I don't mean to be difficult by saying it always depends, but it does depend on what you're even doing currently. Because anytime you make changes, the bigger the change you're making from where you're starting at, the more your body's gonna be like, whoa, I don't like this, because your body does not like change. So we always have to work with that. That being said, I am high protein camp all the way. Okay. I don't believe there's one high protein ratio. I do believe there are always exceptions to the rule, but I am high protein, meaning that I believe most people should have a 30% protein minimum. Okay. So in terms of average weight loss, I would say my most used ratio would be 40 30 30 as a starting point, because that really hits into high protein without being so high protein that it cuts completely out the carbs and fat, right? It's definitely favoring protein.
Okay, I have to sort of interrupt because Tim and I say it in different ways. So 40 is the protein or the carb? Oh, okay.
I always list protein first because it's the most important.
Okay. Protein first, and then second is carbs?
Carbs and then fat.
Got it. Okay.
So 40% protein, 30% carbs, 30% fat. I'll list it out so that you guys know, because not everybody will put protein first.
I do it alphabetically, like that's listed on the app. So it's CFB. I don't know why, but anyway. Okay, so protein
that makes sense.
First.
Mine is just protein is the most important to me. I'm gonna list it first. Probably,
got it.
Probably the Cori weirdness,
There you go. Fat last, right? That evil fat.
I actually don't. Fat is not evil. Fat is very important. Fat is very, very important, and especially depending on your age.
I'm learning that I loved fat a lot more than I thought I did in my diet. Like just from tracking, I was like, holy cow, I think I'm an Eskimo, because I really like.
It's funny though, because you actually hit like higher carb ratios. So you've actually been on higher carb ratios. So it was interesting when you told me that, even because I think sometimes even our interpretation of what's high, because of the low fat dieting culture, you see low fat as 10%. So I see low fat still as potentially 30%. Like that's not that high a fat to me compared to some of the ratios we'll use. So it is one of those things that too, I think it's what we also grew up on. But you will find you're adapted to certain things and that you enjoy things more. And that's where it goes to consistency. Like if you're telling me like, I really like high fat foods, I could take or leave a lot of the carbs, so I'm always going to try and steer that way. We might put you on a lower fat ratio because it does work well for a specific goal, but then we'll always put you back to high fat for sort of maintaining that result because you'll actually want to hit those ratios. You'll enjoy the food. But so for like weight loss, we might do 40% protein, 30% carb, 30% fat. If you're gaining muscle, we might skew the protein a little bit lower down to the 30 to 35%. We're going to potentially bump carbs because bumping carbs can actually really help create that anabolic environment, make sure you're fueled, you have that consistent energy source. And then we might put, fat at like 30% or even drop it a little bit lower. However, it always depends because it's like, then what do you want? Do you want to gain muscle as you're losing fat and embrace the slower process? Because you can do that body recomp at the same time. Are you also not as adapted to carbs? So I will have clients come in who have autoimmune issues or because of their age and have going through menopause, they have to sometimes drop the carbs because they develop a little bit of insulin resistance because of estrogen dropping. So it's one of these things that then we actually have to go lower in the carbs, but that's where you can play around with meal timing, right? If you need that anabolic environment, you need carbs so that you actually have those full glycogen stores for your training, just time a little bit more of your carbs pre and post workout, right? So there's always a way to even adjust every single ratio to match what other things you have going on because we are this complex web, right? We have, our health concerns. We have age as a factor. We have, hormones as a factor. Like even clients during their period, I might put them on a different ratio, different calorie intake because through our cycle, our needs do change a little bit. We even have joint laxivity come up. So we might have to change our training. So it's one of these things that there's, as annoying as it is to say it depends, it really does depend. So I can go into like traditional 6-week cycles I might use, which is why I like created my macro hacks because it has more of those. But that's why I love the coaching because we can take into account all the different facets of somebody's sort of situation and then even tie it back to what they're doing currently. Because I've had friends who express lactose intolerance. So they are basically lactose intolerant, but they don't technically have the gene for it. But there's some other factor in their life that is making them not be able to tolerate it. So there's even weird things that impact our genetics, like our previous diet and history impacts things. So there's so many nuances to it, which is also why the more you can sort of see what you're doing currently and then even experiment, which is one of my favorite things. Like in my beginner section, like when I'm teaching someone to do it on their own, I'll be like, this is the experimental thing. You'll do one that's higher protein, one that's higher carb, one that's higher fat. And then see how you even respond on those different cycles from how do you feel in terms of your energy? How did you enjoy the food? Did, something make you feel better, worse? How was your digestion? Were you able to hit the meals easier because of the foods you tend to have around you? How did you respond? Did you have to bump your calories when you bumped your protein because you really responded to the thermic effect of protein? What sort of happened to you? And then you might even find that as you get older, the ratios change, even though you like other ratios usually to lose weight, which is where people get into problems, right? They go through menopause, they're like, well, I used to do this. Okay, well, nothing works forever. Now you got to change the ratio because you're less able to utilize protein as efficiently. So you might have to increase. Maybe your training has changed from when you're younger. So that also impacts then the level of carbohydrates you need. So I know that was like a long tangent on it, but that's really
it's awesome. How long do you usually let people when you have people say try out the different cycles, like you said, high protein, then high carb or higher fat. How long do you recommend giving it? Is it 3 weeks? Because I'm just saying that because that's usually what ours are on so far, or longer. I mean, can you get a weekend and go, oh, this really sucks, I feel horrible, and quit, or should you give it the 3 weeks?
I like someone to do 2 to 3 weeks when they're experimenting. And usually we like to try and change with workout cycles as much as possible, because then we can address any sort of like different energy systems we're working, any different goals that we have in the different progressions. So that way we can cycle the macros with that as well. But 2 to 3 weeks really allows you to see, because your body doesn't like change. So 1 week of doing something different, be it calories, be it macros, your body is sort of like, this is very different. I'm getting a different energy source. It might take time to adjust. And there's some that you might not adjust as much to. So you might like those ratios better because you can instantly go to them and it feels great. And then there's ones you don't use because it does take the full week to adjust. But you do want to do it for 2 weeks just to see. And the really annoying part of all of this is that you might not see results on something for 2 to 3 weeks, and then go to a new ratio. But part of the results you're seeing on the new ratio are even because of the cycles you've done previously too, because that's where you get into like with going low carb after being high carb, glycogen depletion and water weight being lost. So you might get that sort of weight loss because of that. But you'll see that even because of the changes between a higher carb ratio and a lower carb ratio. Or if you've been lower carb and you actually go higher carb, right? We usually think, oh, I'm going to gain weight from the carbs because I'm going to store water weight too. But you might actually see the whoosh effect because your body might have more readily available energy. So those fat cells that had been storing water weight might release it. So you might actually lose weight from that calorie spike or from the increase in carbs. So there's little things you can do with the different cycles and ratios and calories even to create those results.
Yeah. I sorry for interrupting, but I found something really fascinating, which, I mean, I kind of thought it just from our biochem that we know as docs, but I was on one of the talks that we were talking about why people go on these crazy low carb diets and then suddenly lose, how these people can just dump like 30 pounds in like 2 months or something, but then they go back to eating normal and then boom, they gain it all back. And I can just think of so many patients and friends who can ditch weight easily, you know, to fit into that wedding dress or some events coming up. And it's because of lots of water weight and how glycogen hangs on to that. Can you explain that a little bit more for everybody listening? What happens?
Oh yeah, so fad diets are so interesting. and also fad diets are why later on in life we're like, oh, nothing works anymore. It's my age. It's not your age, it's actually your poopy dieting practices early on, so stop them. But in terms of just cutting carbs and how that really impacts you, when you store 1 gram of glycogen, you actually bring with it 3 to 4 grams of water weight. So what that can look like is even an easy 6-pound swing. The more muscle you have too, the more glycogen you can store. So the more water weight you're going to bring with it, right? And that's not even talking about inflammation from your workouts, which might make you store more glycogen. It's not talking about inflammation from lack of sleep, all those different things. So if you start sleeping more, you cut out carbs, you're going to see a big drop on the scale, right? And then if you're cutting calories extra low, you might also be losing muscle mass. Okay. So when people get thinner and they're like, well, I'm thin, but I don't have the body composition I want. Well, it might be that you're under eating and it might be that you're losing muscle because no, I mean, I've done it too. Like
that would be me. Yeah.
This has been like a big thing for me. Like when I was trying to explain my journey to people, like they're like, oh, well, you just had leanness. You didn't have to work. I'm like, no, I was the orange with 2 thick limbs, A, and B, anytime I would diet down before because I would just do calories, I would get skinny. I didn't look lean. I got skinny. And it was one of those things that I wasn't controlling for muscle mass being lost, which is where macros come into play. But it's like when you're under eating and you're under carbing, if you're training hard, so people try and eat less, right? Train harder. You actually create metabolic adaptations. So your body learns to run on less, which is where that retraining process actually needs to come into play to build muscle. But all of your efforts to build muscle aren't paying off because you're not fueling that muscle growth. Plus, muscle is a great energy source. So if your body's like, I'm hungry and I don't have immediate energy, it's not going to tap into your fat stores because your muscle is actually more metabolically costly, right? It takes more energy to maintain your muscle. So your body's like, well, let's get rid of this thing that's costing me a ton of energy when I don't have it and I need it for vital functioning. So you actually will lose muscle mass, which is why then people even lose faster on the scale too. They've depleted their glycogen stores, they've lost water weight, and then they're not controlling for fat versus muscle being lost. And so they lose weight quickly.
So they're not chewing up their fat stores, they're chewing up their muscle first.
That's why we have the term skinny fat.
Right.
Yeah,
No, this is, I'm definitely not any longer fat. Because there's a couple things. The first one is not everyone can get rich fast, but everyone can get rich slow. And this has been a lot slower as far as the scale for me than I anticipated. But I also have always gained muscle fairly easily. And so I don't know how many weeks.
That leads me to a question while you're talking to ask about body types, the ecto, meso, endomorph.
So then
I hate those because honestly, those change based on what you're doing currently. So I would not have considered myself a mesomorph or an ectomorph. I would have said when I was the orange with 2 thick limbs, I was an endomorph, right? But based on how I've actually eaten and changed, your body creates a new set point. So whatever you're training your body to do, it stays at. So those things can change. So I don't believe I'm basing diet off of those things personally. But going even back to your thing, Tim, if you think about body recomp, it's going to be slower, right? Because if you're keeping on muscle as you're losing fat, the scale is not going to change very quickly. But if you're losing 1 pound of fat and 1 pound of muscle, 2 pounds lost, right? But if you keep that 1 pound of muscle and you only lose that 1 pound of fat, you're going to look a whole heck of a lot leaner in the long run. Your metabolic rate's going to be higher, which is going to help you maintain that weight loss, but you're going to lose slower on the scale. You can even see gains as people are losing. So like if you think about it, if you were to lose 2 pounds of fat, but gain 3 pounds of muscle, you gained a pound on the scale, but that body composition is so different because you gained 3 pounds of muscle as you lost 2 pounds of fat. So it's why we take measurements. It's why we go for those slow results, because the faster you try and do it, like the worse it's going to be. And the more you are going to lose muscle mass, the more you're going to set yourself up for a restrictive diet that's going to backfire long term, the more you're going to create metabolic adaptations that end up backfiring, because that's where we see people dieting on 900 calories and then no longer losing, because even though that's technically a deficit, it isn't, because your body's like, well, this is what you're giving me, so that's what I'm going to survive off of. And so it downregulates everything else to accommodate that. It's why people stop fidgeting. It's why they get more tired. It's why we see, like, in my opinion, so much adrenal fatigue, thyroid issues, all those different things popping up, because we have low carb diets, which are promoting that, and we have the undereating, which is promoting that, and that creates metabolic adaptations, which then as we get older and we're less able to build and retain lean muscle, and then we see metabolic adaptations from menopause, we're like, no, age just killed me. It's like, no, your dieting practices didn't promote for you having the things you needed in place to better handle these things.
So what about timing? See, because like I find it a lot easier to maintain. Like I'm on 2,000 calories and 45% protein, 20% carbs, and 35% fat. But like like today I got up, I did the training, I went for a run, and I ate at 12:30. And I don't mind that. I don't mind exercising fasted. I feel okay. Now, once I start eating, if I get hungry again, like I came home from work yesterday and I was hungry, and I was, I had, I don't know, 800 or 900 calories to go, and I would have sacrificed the cat and eaten it raw. I was so hungry.
Well,
like it literally, like I go 0 to like insane bastard in like 20 seconds. And I was better once I started eating, but I'm like, whoa, what the hell's going on here?
Well, I could probably guess, because he came home and ate lunch and I was here, and he ate his whole day's worth of carbs at lunch, which was a massive thing of rice along with...
Was not massive. Well, it was 1 cup.
Actually, you're right. It doesn't have to be massive of rice to get to 25% carbs.
You exaggerate.
So he ate his day's worth of carbs in that one meal, and then...
I didn't. I ate about half, literally.
Okay, we're arguing. But anyway, true. He came home and he was like so hangry. It was almost time for marital counseling. And I'm like, you got to start eating vegetables, or get rid of that bad pasta. So what about timing? Yeah.
I was going to say, I won't even argue about that, but I was actually going to say, potentially you do need more carbs right post-workout if you are hungry, but you might want to consider then breaking your fast, just because there is something where we get too hungry, we get too depleted, where then we just want to eat everything, right? And then our signaling is basically off. Like, it's what even happens with weight loss as people get leaner. You crave things more, even though you don't necessarily need more calories, which is the cravings sort of outweigh the actual appetite that you have or need. So I would tell you that you might need to change your meal timing a little bit more to get something pre-workout as well, so that you have fuller glycogen stores. Either that, or you need to time it so that you're eating a good portion right post-workout, but late enough at night that when you're going into your workout, you aren't depleted. Because if you're depleted, there's going to be sort of this insatiable feeling after your workout. So you might have to change your meal timing, but how we change that, again, will depend on you. You might also find, after we do this little experiment, that you're like, can't do this carbs with my cardio, doesn't work. Or I have to bump my calories even more. Because the thing is, different ratios will require different calorie amounts. But it might just be that it doesn't work for you with the current training too.
Right. But yeah, like I can run after a workout, and I feel great, and I can do it fasted. I mean, I have a little bit more energy if I eat something, but I've run enough distance where I'm used to, I know what it's like to bonk. And as long as I'm not like, you can literally kind of feel yourself switch over and you go, okay, I know I'm burning something now that isn't what I've eaten, because I'm so depleted. And I come home, I'm a little hungry. I'm hungry. I eat, I feel fine. That's not the time. After the workout is usually not the time when I'm like, I want to sacrifice pets.
It's later in the day.
It's later in the day when I've already eaten, or at night. And it's just like, holy cow. Like, okay, now it's like 8:30 or 9:00. I don't want to keep eating, but like, this is just getting mental.
Well, it might be eating a little bit earlier before you get to that point, because sometimes if we just catch ourselves before we get too hungry, that's enough. So you might just need a mid-afternoon snack. Nutrient-dense foods so that you have that like bigger volume so that it really does fill your stomach does always help a little bit. Also, drinking a little bit of water before you eat too can help you really understand your hunger signals. Plus, it helps our training, because if we're training and we're not fully hydrated, that can impact it negatively as well.
No, that's good.
Yeah, good points.
Right. And that's the, like, I understand. I used to say to myself, I'm like, how come people be so gigantic, like, in our society? Like, it's just holy mackerel. And then you realize when you do have an off day or what, like, I go to rock shows or whatever, and there's days where I'm just like, I'll tell our trainer, I'm just like, I'm taking today off because it's just going to be frustrating. Like, it's not going to be fun, and I've waited 2 years for these shows because of the pandemic, that I'm just not going to worry about it for today. And then May gets all uptight, and I'm like, if 24 hours is going to screw the rest of my life up, then I will be 300 pounds just to spite you. That is my new goal.
365 days a year. The few rock shows you go to are why you stay on track the other 300 some odd days, right?
That's exactly
few. Define few.
It has literally been a few, and
it's like food.
That's exactly what I say. But when you start to understand the emptiness of the calories that a lot of us, myself included, had consumed, and it's like, okay, you eat I love Cheetos. You eat a bag of Cheetos and you go, holy crap, there was 660 calories in that bag. It was all carbohydrates and some fat, virtually no protein, and you're still not full? Like,
yep.
Well, the solution is obviously downing it with a 220-ounce bottle of Coke.
Yeah, no kidding.
But it's even why people overeat healthy foods like nuts, right? They're calorically dense.
Oh,
They don't fill up your stomach. They don't trigger those feelings of fullness that then say, hey, I'm done, all these other things. Like, those foods are designed to make you eat more. They are, right? They're hyper palatable.
Agreed.
There's every reason why.
I think nuts
they
are the worst.
Put them in a bar for a
worse.
reason.
Yeah.
They put them in the bar for a reason, right? It's just like, why do they give you a loaf of bread before dinner?
Reese's Pieces were my thing, right? I would eat them until my face like blew up like a chipmunk. I would eat a whole bag easily, right? But then I'm complaining sometimes when I'm eating 8 ounces of meat. I'm like, oh, I'm so full, right? There's such a different feeling to the fullness that you have with those different things, from the actual satiety based on the macros to just how much it expands your stomach, which, yes, like, if you're really hungry and you do eat more vegetables with fill the space, it will trigger you to feel more full than if you have like the same amount of calories in M&Ms, which would be like 2, right? But it's one of those things that, I mean, it's easy to overeat. It really is. And especially if you're not aware of how many calories are in things, where if you go to, like, I'm going to use Taco Bell as an example, because that is one of my guilty food drinking. I don't even feel guilty about it. It's one of my drinking foods. I like Taco Bell, but like, it's easy to get like 5,000 calories and feel like you ate nothing.
I know.
But if you were to eat 5,000 calories of other foods, it doesn't feel like anything. And I will argue, Tim, and you can use this against May, if you only do a 24-hour cheat day, so you only do one day and you don't have other days, I actually think it's the best way to approach overeating or having those other indulgences, because there's only so much your body can actually absorb in that time. And then we can also create the balance in how we create your deficit, how we design your macros, so the averages over the week are pretty good. When you start to have a whole bunch of deviations up and down across the week, that's where it's hard to really understand what's working. So if you're going to do a cheat day, do a cheat day. We can even get into how you can create a little more of a deficit on other days and even have that payoff in terms of maintaining hormonal balance and all that stuff too. So
yeah, no, and like
that's for macros part
right,
too.
but like, well, right, but again, I can't help but go back to the financial analogy. Like, we finally got a financial planner that we trusted and counseled us, and we we go really go through the budgeting appropriately. And that's like, okay, that makes perfect sense. I get this. This is very livable. They're like, if you want this, then you got to do this. And if you want to achieve this other thing, you might have to take this other thing away, blah, blah, blah. All makes sense. And then there's like Dave Ramsey, which is like, don't have fun and never spend on a credit card and have no credit rating. And then just, you'll have a lot of money and then you'll die. And it's like, when people hear that, they're like, screw you. I'd rather just have debt.
Yeah.
And he's been wildly successful, but I love making fun of him because, like, it's just so ridiculously
mentality. Yeah.
extreme, right? Like, if you never go on vacation, if you never buy a new car, if you never get the house that you were dreaming of, or at least 2/3 of it, then why are you working, right?
But it's like people focusing on dieting on holidays, right? I like hate that because I'm like, instead of making something healthier for Thanksgiving, and don't get me wrong, like I do think it's about finding our balance. So there are some people that are like, hey, I don't care about Thanksgiving food. I don't want to like waste it, so to speak, on those. Cool, right? Or hey, I know right now with driving towards my goals, I want to make healthier foods because this will help me stay on track to reach my ultimate goal. There are, of course, reasons to do almost anything. I can argue both sides. But for me, like it's one of those things that I don't want ever someone dying on the holidays, because I think we get into this mentality of one day. One day matters, but what we don't realize is it's not that one day. It's the guilt, it's the restriction, it's anything else that creates multiple other days. Like using Cinco de Mayo as an example, this Thursday, what will happen is people will eat bad on Cinco de Mayo, and then they'll be like, well, I've ruined this week, so I might as well just eat bad on Friday and Saturday and Sunday. I'll start over Monday. It's not Cinco de Mayo. It's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then the fact that on Monday you still feel kind of crappy, so you don't fully do all the habits, right? So it's more thinking about, hey, we have 365 days a year, this example I gave you. How can I be consistent for a majority of those while realizing I'm going to go on vacation, and that's what makes the other part worth it, right? I'm going to go on vacation, I'm going to find my balance, and I'm going to constantly be learning. And you're going to find little 1% improvements that you make over the years. Like for me in past holiday seasons, I have it tracked. This last year, I was like, I've gained more than I've wanted every other holiday. I'm going to track this one. I'm not going to set any restrictions. I'm just going to track. That's my challenge. And then in tracking, I was like, wow, I actually stayed on track. I was good. I realized that I was making an excuse not to track because I didn't want to see it and I wanted to let myself deviate. Versus over the summer, if I don't make myself track because I'm traveling and doing different things, I stay on track because I'm motivated at the time. So it's like one of those things that even knowing your mindset behind why don't you want to do something, or why do you want to do something, so that you can find that balance to stay consistent. I know I keep coming back to that, but consistent long term.
Yeah, that's the key word for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's.
Okay, so I have a few short,
Yeah,
quick question answer types, like yes and no things I thought of. So, supplements, as far as protein supplements, yes or no? Meaning,
do I have
bad?
to only give a yes or no?
No, you can expand,
but it has to be answered in a question like Jeopardy. So what is
yes?
What is whey
it
protein?
depends.
Yes.
So I think supplements are good. So yes, they are processed at points, but I think they are good in that they can keep you on track. They can keep you consistent. They can help you find that balance. They can allow you to even eat more nutrient dense foods. I think they're only bad if you're trying to rely only on them. However, if you're just learning and you have a couple of protein shakes because that's the balance to start, great. Then over time, you let the changes snowball. But I think they can be a really great way to stay on track, better than reaching for a lot of other things. And again, the more we demonize things, the more we end up holding ourselves back from finding something consistent for us.
Perfect. Alcohol, we didn't go down that road, but you said it's its own macro. So,
and it's delicious.
Yeah.
I am an alcohol fan, okay? Obviously, we're not talking about addiction to alcohol or any of those things, but I believe that alcohol can be a part of a balanced lifestyle. But I think in recognizing that, you have to realize it is 100% toxic. It is not good for you in any way, shape, or form. The amount you'd have to drink of your wine to get the health benefits is just ridiculous, and most people don't even benefit from it. Sorry, man, I know you like your wine. But I think that it goes back to stressors, right? There are good and bad stressors. If enjoying your wine, enjoying your drink with friends, enjoying your cocktails is part of what's fun for you in life, do it. I love making drinks. I love making cocktails. I like going to cocktail bars when we travel. It was one of the best experiences when we went to South Korea and found a lot of wall, went to cocktail bars, right? Drank way too much, but that was part of my balance, right? But I also know that I'm not going to drink every single night because it's going to cause inflammation. It's going to cause me to sleep poorly. It's going to impact my workouts. And sorry, Tim, but it actually impacts men more than women because of how your testosterone is created, aka false. But it's one of the
I have a needle. I have a needle to fix that problem.
Okay. Well, I don't need to know about that. But I think it's part of the balance, right? I do think you can work it in. I think when you're first tracking, it can be really good on your cheat day or even the 1 day or 2 days you include it to track it, just so you know how it impacts your calories. But I think overall it can be included, but you just have to know the negative ramifications that it will slow fat metabolism. It will hinder your weight loss. It will impact sleep and recovery and all those different things. So ideally, if you are trying to drive towards faster results in short term, you do cut it out for a period. However, knowing you want.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is unbelievably empty from a caloric perspective, though. Like it.
And it makes you want to eat other foods. And
Yeah.
it really does cause inflammation. It causes you to sleep so poorly. I know people will be like, well, go to sleep right after. Okay, but your quality of sleep is way worse. It's way worse.
Yeah.
But
So what about
I'm too martini sexy. Like I'm way sexier after I have.
yes.
Well, you at least think so. It's just looking in the mirror. Hey.
There you
Right.
go.
That's what I've always questioned. You talk to my friends that, enjoy maybe a little bit too much cannabis. And they're like, yeah, it makes me super creative. I'm like, no, it just makes you think you're more creative. You're just dumb.
Oh my God.
Like, and that's always the question, right? It's just like when people do these radical diet changes, like, man, I have so much mental clarity and I have way more energy and all this. And I'm like, well, that's probably because you felt like absolute dog crap for the last 3 weeks. Now you're just maybe a little bit better than normal. So it seems like all of this stuff is going on.
And you've lost weight. If you've lost weight, you're actually going to see a lot of health improvements. It's why there's even debates with like intermittent fasting versus just a calorie deficit. Because if you just do the calorie deficit, you can see the same benefits. If you lose weight, you're going to see health markers already improve, right? It's the fact that you made changes that usually mean more whole natural foods, better energy for workouts, better training sessions, better sleep, a little bit of weight loss.
So if you like the whole rainbow of booze, which, I might say that I do, other than whiskey, is there
Drink
one?
the rainbow.
No, so I like my wine, but I'm actually a giant vodka snob connoisseur. Beer, not so much anymore because of my gluten intolerance. But is there one, I wouldn't say better than another, but the clear, like you say, vodka, anything clear is better. People could say, oh, beer's better because it's got nutritional yeast or something in it. Is it all just a pile that's the same?
I would say if you're going to drink,
something.
I was gonna say if you're gonna drink what you enjoy the most, because that makes it worthwhile, and that's also going to satisfy you without having to drink as much. I've found that if I try and force alcohols that I don't really enjoy as much, I just crave even more, which then makes you drink more calories or more frequently or whatever else. Drink the drinks you enjoy. Like for me, I don't even want to sacrifice on taste. Like I'm gonna make a strawberry margarita and I'm gonna put in the strawberry syrup, the agave, all that different stuff because it's gonna taste good. I'm gonna enjoy it the most. So that's where that comes in. If I am trying to stay on track and maybe I'm tracking it that day and it was an event where I don't want to say I feel obligated, because if I don't want to drink, I won't drink, but I want to have a drink, but I don't want to have something. Sure, I'll go for something that's not a Diet Coke, something that doesn't have calories to mix with an alcohol, and then you can be okay.
Yeah, like I found that my literally 2 ounces of vodka with lime and ice cubes goes a long way. And so what do you recommend people track it as? Depends what macro thing you're on versus whether it's carbs or fat or.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it will basically log as empty calories. And so what I have clients do is enter it as create a food and take those calories and then either divide it by 4 to get the grams of carbs or 9 to get the grams of fat. The only thing I don't let them take it from is protein. If you can, you want to take it from fat whenever possible, just because it does really like slow fat digestion and metabolism.
Okay.
No, that's really
cool.
good.
All right. That's awesome. Man, there's so many more questions.
Well, we could
ask,
we could go on forever. But it brings, I'm the big picture guy, the really big picture guy. And it's, just like you see these pictures from the 40s and the 50s of people in a movie theater, and you go, where's all the fat people, and something changed. And there's a lot of theories. One was the mid 70s with the sugar shortage and high fructose corn syrup and all this. And if you've read, I forget the guy's name, that Good Fat or Good Calories, Bad Calories, where he talks about how, when the U.S.
Gary Taubes, right?
Yeah,
Todd. Yeah, Todd.
That's right.
Yeah, the U.S. Dietary Survey or whatever came out and like essentially pushed a super high carbohydrate diet, and then everyone's, everybody's weight started to go up.
The food pyramid
and the food pyramid was always like, like
heavily laden with carbs.
Well, I'd send diabetics to the dietitian, and they would only essentially talk about carbohydrates. Everything was a carbohydrate exchange. And the solution is, if they went over in carbs or their blood sugar went up, take more insulin. And I'm like, insulin is the fat growth hormone. It makes you fat. Like, hello, that's what it does. Like, the problem, these people are insulin resistant, and you're giving them more insulin. That's like going to an AA meeting and having gin and tonics for communion. Like,
sad.
Come on. Like,
we should do a show on that.
It's just completely insane. And so, something changed. We can, that's a whole other bunny trail to go down. But the bottom line in any kind of change is, and it's in a Megadeth song called Tears in a Vial, which is I gave up something I loved to gain something I loved even more. And that's really what it is,
And you can't change what you don't know.
You can't, well,
as
you
far
can't.
as if you don't know what you're eating and you're not tracking your macros, how can you change? Which is kind of what hit me on the head.
It's even realizing that what's ultimately sustainable doesn't feel sustainable to start, because what's instinctual, what's natural is what we've always done. It's our comfort zone, right? And when you're tracking too, a lot of times people get frustrated they're not hitting the ratio. And it's like, but you're doing what you've always done. You're approaching it the same way you've always approached it. And if you're hitting that ratio naturally, you wouldn't be in this situation. So there is a retraining process. And I like that line of like, what you'll find you might even love even more, right? You might be really rebellious against tracking macros, right? You might not want to do it. And when you start to do it, you start to realize how good you can feel, how much you can understand your portions, how much you can really find that balance with the foods you love. All of a sudden you might be like, okay, well, I can put up with the tedium of tracking because I get to do all these other things, right? It might not feel sustainable to start, but what is sustainable is ultimately trying to create the healthiest version of our lifestyle. And macros, as annoying as it is, really gives you that power.
Well, and that's a great place to kind of button this up. Just a wonderful interview. I mean, the bottom line is, I can only speak for myself. My body composition has changed. May can attest to this quite dramatically in the last 12 weeks.
Well, when you have people coming up to him saying,
I feel great.
You've lost weight, even though the scale isn't budging as
I've
fast
lost
as
10.
you want.
I've lost 10 pounds. Like I'm still technically have a BMI of 29 or 30. Well, but so does Joe Rogan. But my body composition is totally different. Mm-hmm. Like it's completely different. Like, now like I'm running again. Thank you. That has just been a huge gain for me, just because mentally that is my go-to. I mean, people could tell me you'll get liver disease and die like an alcoholic if you keep running. And I'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to keep running because sorry, that's my thing. But my legs are getting bigger. Whereas before, you'd run and they'd kind of get to a certain size and you'd lose all this other body mass. And I'm like, my quads and hamstrings, I've always had amazing calves, are kind of blowing up a little bit. And the gluteal activation is an amazing thing. Like that we could do that might be the next episode, which is just how important it is from
glute love
and getting May's butt cheeks to activate.
Yeah, yes. We're still trying.
Hypermobility, man, it gets you.
I know.
When she's hypermobile,
I have all these other excuses, like my torso's too long to do some of these things. And anyway, it's a whole.
That's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. The hypermobility creates its own unique challenges because you want to rest on structure, but that is the whole other podcast.
Exactly.
Well, and that's what I've always and I think I mentioned that to our trainer, which was, I watch Cori do these exercises that I'm supposed to do, and we have mirrors in our home gym, and I'm doing these. And, for you, it's just like this really fluid and you're really flexible. And like, I look like a newborn hippo that's trying to get up like a muddy creek bed.
The only way to get better at them, though, is to do them.
She's the gazelle right. And you're the muddy hippo.
She's like the cheetah stretching out after it's just eaten an entire like wildebeest.
Anyway.
And
well, I do just want to point out though, too, with your weight loss, we also have unrealistic expectations, in my opinion, based on fad diets where it's 10 pounds in like 2 weeks, right? But 1 pound of fat loss per week is really, really good because 1% body recomposition, so fat loss over the month, technically is really, really good. So those results are actually really good and sustainable, and true fat being lost over muscle also being lost. So I do also want to highlight that so you give yourself some credit, because I do think too often we do seek those fad diet results and we're like 10 pounds overnight. If we don't get that, we're failures. And it's like, no, you actually found a lifestyle balance. You actually lost fat, and that's going to continue to snowball. So that's all credit to you being consistent. So
I thought I just had to take V-Shred and everything would change. Sorry. Sarcasm's my love language.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, Cori, thanks for being here with us and giving us your time and letting everybody hear your thoughts and tips. And if you will come back again in the future and we can dive into down some more bunny trails, it would be awesome because We could talk about this for
Glute activation.
As long as it's talking about butt cheeks, I am all in. Butt cheek talk, I'm all in.
Sweet. All right. So just quickly, I'll let you say where everybody can find you, and I'll link it in our show notes. I mean, you're on everywhere, right? All social media, pretty much.
I was gonna say, if you search for Redefining Strength, you'll find me.
Redefining Strength, and I'll link it all: Facebook, Instagram. Are you on Twitter? I don't do Twitter.
I don't do Twitter either.
Yeah.
YouTube, Instagram, Facebook.
Yep. I'll put the links
Pinterest.
in again.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again for being here. We will be chatting with you probably later today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Thanks. See ya. That was really great. I could just talk forever and ask her a millions of questions, and she's like an endless resource of information, and it is really fun to do these episodes with Cori. I'm just laughing, thinking, because we were talking about diet and changing the things that we eat and increasing our protein, and Tim's eating so much shrimp. I'm ready for him to turn pink like a flamingo. So I'm looking at his skin carefully to see if he's changing color. Not yet.
Shrimp is amazing. Like, it's almost free. Like, it's just basically protein.
Yeah.
And if you can eat it, and if you have a few fat calories to give, you can cook it in a little bit of butter without going completely insane on the calories and fat side, and still have tons of protein.
Yeah.
It really is amazing.
So we hope you found that interview helpful, enlightening, encouraging. You can certainly find lots of more information from Cori on her Facebook page, Instagram, YouTube. She has videos all the time. She posts and responds to almost everybody that asks questions. She works literally 24/7, 7 days a week, even on vacation, and is always responding to people. But so go find her there. And if you find it interesting, you can actually purchase, I know, just parts of her program. The macro hacks is for purchase. She also does do individual coaching sessions, etc., as we said. But so much information, there's no excuse not to make a change. And let me just say, we've made a definite change in our diet. Tim's not.
I am growing,
pink, but
I'm growing ablets from my flablets.
I think we're getting fins. All the fish we're eating.
Lots of fish.
All right. We'll see you back next week for another great episode. We do have another fun story coming up in the next couple of weeks about an amazing weight loss story. But we'd like to hear from you. If you have any amazing stories on your journey through diet and fitness, send them to us, because maybe we will interview you to be on our show. We're always open to ideas. And I don't know, I'm looking for Carnivore Man next, I think.
And one last thing. We want you to check out Steelhead Fitness if you are from our small town. Great gym, great people, tons of resources, classes, diet info, just an excellent resource if you really want to take your health and your fitness seriously.
End of story.
Yeah.
All right. Give us a few likes, shout outs, shares, and we'll see you next time.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.